Hello and welcome to our learning video with ARC England, the Association for Real Change. We're going to find out more about domestic abuse and how it affects people with learning disabilities and autism. We hope that you as schemes will be helped to think about how shared lives can support people who've experienced domestic abuse. My name is Ali Miller and I am the Development Officer for Domestic Abuse and Modern Slavery at Shared Lives Plus. For the last 2 years, we've been leading a small pilot project to look at whether shared lives could be an accommodation and support option for women who have experienced domestic abuse. And one of the key learnings from this work has been in finding out that shared lives as a sector already supports many people with learning disability and autism who have also experienced domestic abuse. We've also come to better understand that people with learning disabilities and autism, as well as other support needs, are unfortunately more likely to be victims of domestic abuse, and that they're often subject to severe domestic abuse. So to help us understand this better and to help us get an understanding of how shared life schemes can support people, we're joined by some experts working in the field. So welcome to Claire and Rod from ARC England. Rod and Claire both work on a project called Us Too, which is a peer education project about how people with learning disabilities and autism are affected by domestic abuse. So am I correct in thinking that the project is led by women, several of whom have experienced domestic abuse themselves?
That's correct.
Do you want to introduce yourselves before we start the PowerPoint presentation today?
Yes, can do. My name's Claire Lambell. I'm one of the trainers of this domestic abuse training.
And I'm Rod Landsman, and I'm the project coordinator.
Thanks, both of you. I'll hand over to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing from ARC today. Thank you.
Over to you, Claire.
We're going to talk about today how, and this project is all about keeping yourself safe from domestic abuse, and how you can keep yourself safe from it. And we have all different, all the people who are actually teaching have all been through domestic abuse, and we sort of give you tools and try and equip you so that you don't go through abuse, or you understand if it's happening to you, or understand how to get out of it. We got a team of about 6 trainers. We all go out, we train, we're all women, we all go out and train basically in a team of 2. We all got learning disabilities, and we've all had bad relationships. And basically, we hope you can learn from our experience. And basically, the majority of us we'll talk how to get out of a bad relationship and have a happy life, which is basically what we all want, really. So yeah, I hope you enjoy what we had to say and take on board. Us Too. It's funded by Comic Relief until next year, 2021. And it's run by ARC, the Association of Real Change. We are training peers and professionals. We are telling domestic abuse services how they can get better for women with learning disabilities and autism. And today we will talk about basically what is domestic abuse, and do you know it's happening, and why does it happen, and what if you have a learning disability or autism, and what you can do about it, and where to get help. And that's what we're going to basically do. Look after yourself whilst we're doing this, because we know it's a subject that's not very could be very upsetting. So please feel free. It is okay to feel sad. Be sensitive. It's probably happened to someone here. It's all right to take time out if you need it. And please don't bottle things up. Please use your support and the helplines we give you. And feel free to talk to us afterwards.
Our contact details appear on the at the end of the presentation.
Yeah. And we've done a survey at Blue Light Day.
Yep. Is it okay if I take over at this point, Claire?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Give me a minute. So yes, just as Claire said, before the project started, what we're seeing over the next few slides is a quick bit of work that we did. I wouldn't say it's not what you'd call it. It's not quotable academically, shall we say? But there's an interesting piece of work we during the introduction to the project, and then during the first few peer education sessions that Claire already mentioned, we've probably now spoken to about 200 women with learning disabilities and or autism, and asked them some very basic questions about domestic abuse, just to kind of set up a bit of a benchmark for the work. And as Claire said, the first bit of that was done at what are called Blue Light Days in far southwest Devon and Cornwall, which is where the team are based. The emergency services put on annual events for people with learning disabilities, and basically how to kind of stay safer in your community. So we used that opportunity to talk to all these women. And these are some of the findings of the work that we did, just to give you a feel for why the project's so necessary. So the first project we asked, the first question we asked was, is it okay if your boyfriend or girlfriend hits you, but then says sorry and buys you chocolates? Now, obviously, I'd expect anyone listening to this, watching this webinar, would say no, that's not okay. When we spoke to women with learning disabilities about this, nearly a quarter of them said that was absolutely fine. The next question is more about coercive control, which we'll come back to later in the presentation. And the question here was, is it okay if your boyfriend or girlfriend cares about you so much they tell you what to do the whole time? In response to that one, again, nearly a quarter of women said that was fine. The next question was just about domestic abuse, and it was just about hearing the phrase. This wasn't even knowing what it was about, what it involved, how to escape from it, any of the other things that we'll be talking about later on. It was just basically having heard that phrase, domestic abuse. And we asked women that. Nearly a third of women hadn't even heard the phrase, never mind having any understanding of it. And then the question that we've introduced more recently, because as Claire said, in the autumn, we're hoping to be able to be working with domestic abuse and sexual violence services across Devon and Cornwall, supporting them to become more accessible to women with learning disabilities and autism. So we started asking women attending the peer workshops if they know how to contact their local domestic abuse services. And the response we've had so far, that with fewer numbers than the initial 200 that I mentioned, so with fewer numbers, but so far 100% absolutely not. And actually, I would say that probably in about half of the cases that the women that we spoke to didn't even know that there was a local domestic abuse service. Okay, Claire, back to you for what we do in the peer education workshops.
What we do in the peer education workshops is relationships. So we talk to women with learning disabilities and autism about what is a relationship, all different kinds of,
Sorry.
yes, all different kinds of relationships, not just boyfriend and girlfriend. What makes a good boyfriend or girlfriend? And we also talk about rules for a relationship, and there's different rules for different relationships. And then further along, we talk about domestic abuse. So that's the basis of excuse me, what we learn. So we learn what a relationship is and what makes a good boyfriend and girlfriend, and basic rules for a relationship, because we all have rules to obey in everyday life. So we basically have what rules for relationships, because not all relationships are the same. So we sort of think about rules for different sort of relationships, not just boyfriend and girlfriend. And then we go into what domestic abuse is about.
Yeah.
So.
And why does domestic abuse come so far down that list then, Claire? What have we found if we start by talking about domestic abuse?
We found that they don't even engage, or they don't even want to know. It's, for some reason, it's that word domestic abuse. So if we turn it around and we found that if we put it in a phrase like something different, we find that we have more success with people engaging.
It's easy to start that conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's a bit, I also think it's a bit like the previous work, the work that we did on sexual exploitation as well, which is that, again, when we went and started talking about sexual exploitation, what we found was that women very frequently actually had very limited understanding of relationships.
Yeah. So we had to, because when we started, we were just talking about the relationships with boyfriend and girlfriends, and wanted to get a grip on if they knew about other relationships. And we found that we had to go right back to the beginning about what is a relationship. We found that they didn't know what a relationship is. So we had to modify it and go back to actually what is a relationship. And we talk about it and we write it up on the board. Like I said, we do what different relationships there are. So
absolutely. Okay, right, I'm going to take over and start talking about the definitions now, and the basic question. So what is domestic abuse? And well, the next slide is not one that we share in the peer education workshops, but it is in the workshops for professionals. And this is the official government definition. And do feel free to I'm not going to take you through this. Do feel free to freeze the screen at this point and read the definition, because it's important. And there's nothing to disagree with in that definition at all. I suppose the health warning at this point would be that definition is likely to change within the next year when the new domestic abuse legislation comes through. So do keep your eyes open for that. And with a new domestic abuse commissioner in post as well now, who I'm sure will want her say. So it is likely to change, but I doubt it'll differ too much from this. I think we just want to sort of point out at this point, if you show this to people who learn disabilities, the response you tend to get is, huh? There's so much jargon in there. One of the sentences, I think, comprises 57 words. I'm pretty sure I counted them one day with no punctuation at all. So people are just going to say, people who learn disabilities and autism just completely mystified by this definition. So a couple of things. The next slide is actually in the professionals workshops. One of the tasks that we give people is to come up with an easier read definition, and this is one that we particularly liked. And I think it's probably because it was brought remarkable similarity to the one that we'd come up with in our own team meetings earlier in the project. So what staff in this workshop talked about was someone who says they love you, but makes you sad, feels scared, makes you feel pain, says bad things about or to you, makes you do things you don't want to do, tells you what to do all the time, stops you seeing your friends and family, takes your money. And it's almost like they had a crib sheet, because this is the one that we came up with ourselves as a team during the development phase of the project. And what the team, the interpretation the team gave it was, if someone very close to you hurts you, is cruel to you, threatens you, tells you what to do all the time, takes your money, or makes you have sex when you don't want to, that might be domestic abuse. bullet pointed because we felt it was just important to give examples, because that's easier for people to understand, and obviously stripping it right back. In doing that, of course, you do lose some of the key concepts, like, for example, it being a pattern of behaviour, which is actually really important for the definition of domestic abuse. But we found no way of accommodating that in an easier read version. You're always going to lose something. Okay, so Claire, back to you to start talking about indicators.
So we put, so how do you know domestic abuse is happening? And we said,
I think this is worth saying, Claire, that these are all quotes from team members about their own experiences of domestic abuse.
So it's, yeah. So the quotes were, I wasn't behaving like myself. I stopped doing what I normally do. I was very protective of him. I isolated myself from my family, missing family occasions.
And they were some of those were really important family occasions as well, weren't they, Claire? They were with things like weddings and so on.
Yeah. My flat was a mess, which isn't me. I changed my appearance and clothes. I was doing anything to keep him happy. I stopped eating. I told someone at church.
And that pretty much encapsulates. And the next slide is when we asked professionals. So again, in the professionals workshops, we asked people what they thought were the indicators of domestic abuse, and the list that they came up with was actually, you know, very, very similar, and they've pretty nailed it there, really, in terms of the main indicators. There's many more. There was a stupendously long list of 50 or 60 different indicators, all of which were completely valid and true. But I think on this side, you know, that the ones that they kind of voted for most, as it were, both replicated what the women in the team were saying, and also nailed, say, the main indicators as well. So there you go. Those are the main ones, but there are others. Okay, so Claire, back to you for more quotes from the scene.
Yeah, so this is the same, more quotes. So what is domestic abuse like? We said, he wanted to know where I was the whole time and who I was with. He told me to ignore my mum and move away from home. There was a gut feeling of wrongness. I felt guilty about everything all of the time. People were telling me I didn't listen. He chipped away at my confidence. He blamed me for everything. He made constant demands. I thought I was living the dream, love is blind. He was angry all the time and jealous. He was always nice to my friends. They didn't know anything was wrong.
Thanks, Claire. So the next few slides are about, so why is it more likely, as Ali referenced in her introduction, if you have a learning disability, domestic abuse, from what we know, is far more likely to happen to you, in line with other forms of abuse as well. This next slide is drawn from Public Health England report from 2015, which we give you the full reference to later in the presentation, which you could better click on and follow it through. It's well worth reading. It's not a long document. It's very comprehensive, gives you a decent overview of the issue as far as not just learning disability, but all disability is concerned. And what that report says is that people experience higher rates of abuse. As I say, we would say as a rule of thumb, at least double. I think 4 times is probably closer to the mark, but we don't know what you would call authoritative research on it. So it's hard to establish a true figure, but certainly higher. So higher rates of abuse. It tends to go on for longer before people successfully leave a relationship, or in fact unsuccessfully leave a relationship by being killed. The type of abuse that disabled women experience is both of greater severity and happens more often. There's more coercion and control involved, no surprises there, and that's an issue that we'll come back to later in the presentation. And this is partly as a result of women living in particularly vulnerable circumstances, and this often, and what they mean by that. And I think that, well, there's a number of things that they mean, but prime amongst those reasons are that people are dependent on a far wider pool of people than those of us who are not disabled, and experience more barriers to services. And again, we'll come back to that to say we are talking about our work with domestic abuse and sexual violence services in the Southwest later on. So there's a brief reference to it, but I see the click through will appears later in the presentation. Okay. So these are the things. Now, when the team talked about this issue in its meetings, say setting up, when we were drawing up our training programs at the beginning of the project in summer of last year, these are the things that the team identified in terms of why they thought it was more likely to happen to you if you had a learning disability. Prime amongst those was lack of sex education. All team members talked about, I think nearly everybody had been to a special school.
Yeah.
And to say, as much as we know that sex education is poor for the general population, if you have a learning disability, it is even worse. That people with learning disabilities are frequently overprotected, and that tends to have the exact opposite of effect of the one intended. So if you are wrapping people in cotton wool, basically you're not equipping them with the skills and experience that they need to find themselves out, to find their way out of difficult situations and abusive situations. There is a huge lack of reporting. Again, within the team, you could see that kind of actually sort of 50-50 split between women who would try to tell somebody and women who had never told anybody. Sometimes we just think that people just don't know it's wrong, and that's kind of a product of the socialisation of people with learning disabilities, the lack of sex education, the lack of ongoing education and awareness training for people with learning disabilities, just not being able to understand that what's happening within their relationship is different. It's wrong. It's not how it should be. People not having the skills to be able to report, and that comes up in that survey finding we had earlier on, with 100% of women not knowing how to contact their local domestic abuse service, and most of them not even knowing that they had one. So not knowing how to report, people not being listened to. So again, experience within the team, I think, replicates the wider trend, which is that even when women did pluck up the confidence and the wherewithal to make a report, what then very often happened was that they just weren't listened to. It was just ignored. It was just brushed under the carpet. You do tend to get, in our experience, within learning disabilities in the social care sector, a kind of a compliance with that approach. And sometimes for people with more extreme learning disability, with more extreme versions of autism, we all know that all behaviour is communication, but quite often it'll be, and that communication can take the form of what's been labelled challenging behaviour in the past. And sometimes if you have a learning disability, that so-called challenging behaviour is described just as the fact that you have a disability, rather than it being an attempt to communicate distress, abuse, trauma. People, and we've touched on this earlier on, people being reliant on that wider pool of people, and if you're reliant on your perpetrator for your everyday care needs, it's much more difficult to escape that relationship. Sometimes people do have communication difficulties, and that's tied into them not knowing how to report stuff earlier on. But it's also just having the language for describing what's happened to you. Second slide on this one. Yeah, very often no staff training. I think in our experience in the project, well, as far as we're aware on the project, we're pretty much the only one of its kind in the country. We're not aware of anyone else in the country who's offering training to social care services on domestic abuse and learning disability and autism. Police awareness is fairly chronic, and that's both in terms of domestic abuse, in which they've still got a pretty poor record when it comes down to it, but also in terms of how they communicate with people with learning disabilities. And again, that kind of awareness that it does happen more to you if you have a disability, and sometimes even as very basic learning is lacking amongst the police. Untrained specialist services, that's back to domestic abuse and sexual violence services. So we did a quick survey amongst services in the far southwest and found that, again, most of them were quite happy to hold their hands up and say, yeah, we really don't know what we're doing as far as learning disability is concerned. I think that would be replicated nationally. Lack of confidence in behalf of the abused party, just feeling, again, that inner strength to be able to go and report it. Abuse is very often normalised if you have a learning disability, and I always remember some work that we did earlier on peer-led projects around mate crime and people with learning disabilities, round about the introduction of the Human Rights Act. This is going back a little while now. And I was speaking to a community nurse who told me that she'd been working with a self-advocacy group on the introduction of the Human Rights Act. And at the end of the piece of training, she'd said to people, so who does the Human Rights Act apply to? And the first hand went up and the person said, normal people. And what they meant by normal people is anybody who didn't have a disability. And she went on to talk to them about hate crime as a kind of an aspect of human rights work and sort of basic protections you ought to be able to expect if you have a learning disability. And she asked the group if any of them had experienced a hate crime, and nobody put their hands up at all. And she knew that couldn't possibly be right. So she said, okay, well, if I give you an example here. So she said, let's say you're just waiting by the bus stop in the morning for the bus to come along. Has anybody here ever been spat at? To which they all said, oh yeah. But because it happened to them all the time, every day, that abuse had become normalised, not worth commenting on. And if your boundaries have been shifted so far, you can see the point at which you feel that it's appropriate to report a crime becomes warped. The next is about learning compliance. I said we were going to come back to that, and I think this is this is a very basic one. I've worked in learning disability for my whole life, and when I speak to learning disability providers, I always say to them, if you're honest, you know that there are ways in which you can ask a question of somebody with a learning disability, which is going to produce the answer that you want. And if we're honest with ourselves about that, we can see the way in which that essentially it manufactures consent. It means that people with learning disabilities have been socialised to do what they're told, basically. If they don't, they're punished in some way. More subtle forms these days than in the history of services, but it is still there. And we have experience of that ourselves, Claire, don't we? That when we've done bits of training with women, I think particularly with more significant learning disabilities, that are very, very keen to tell you what they think you want to hear rather than what they think.
Yes.
Sometimes people do have difficulties in making relationships. We can't get away from that. And again, we look back to work that we've done previously here on sexual exploitation and on mate crime. And again, we have to recognise that very often people will accept an abusive relationship rather than having no relationship at all. And sometimes the choices really are that stark for people. Very often people, especially people on the autistic spectrum, can just miss the social signals, the subtleties about interpersonal communication that makes abusive situations more likely to occur. And very often, kind of as a result of all of the above, if you will, women with learning disabilities and autism experience very low levels of self-esteem. And kind of you get into that kind of mindset of you're not worth anything else. So again, why is the abuse worth commenting on? Okay, so Claire, would you like to take people through an example of one of the training tools that we use both in peer workshops and in those that we do with professionals?
Absolutely. And this is Misha's story. Misha's a made-up person, but all the quotes in Misha's story is all what the trainer said happened to them. But the story is made up and Misha's made up. So I just wanted to be loved. I met Jack and he was lovely. Everyone loved him. He treated me like a grown-up, buying me drinks and taking me out to the casino.
And what do we do when we're using this in a training situation, Claire?
We asked about what they find is wrong and right in it. And we found that they think everything is right with it.
that can be the case, can't it? Yes. I think it's worth pointing out this one. I think that, you know, that as Claire said, every word, you know, even though Misha's made up, every word in here is taken from, obviously the names are changed. Every word in here is taken from one team member or another. And I think what we point out with this one is that you can see the attraction in this first one, in that I know that for the team member for whom this element of the story was telling their own story, that you know, she was a woman at this point in her mid-20s, and Jack, as I say, made that name, did these things, and it was the first time in her life that she'd actually felt like a grown-up. It was the first time in her life that she'd not been treated like a child, and that was what was so seductive about the situation.
So when he lost, he borrowed money from me, but I never seemed to get it back. I didn't mind. It's what you do if you love someone. And then we go through the same question again, what's right and wrong with it? And usually they say everything's right with it.
Yeah. And again, you can understand it because it is that whole thing. And I think when we're doing the professionals workshops, we'll say to people, well, you know, have you ever borrowed money from your partner and not got it back? And I suspect that's a fairly common experience, and would be regarded as part of a kind of a normal relationship. Yeah. Okay.
Jack started telling me what to do the whole time, and he always needed to know where I was, who I was with. He said he is just looking after me, and again we asked the question and they said that was fine.
And again, you can kind of understand why, I think, can't you? And particularly for if you have a learning disability or autism, you're brought up in care situations, because that's pretty much what people are told every day, isn't it? You know, yeah. We need to know where you are all the time so we can keep you safe. So if that's what people are being told all the time, it's surprising that they extend that to their relationships.
Jack was always fun to be with, and I wanted to please him. But now he says, I don't need my friends. I have him, and that's all I need.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that one, Claire?
Yeah. When I was going through my problem, that was like my abuse. That's what he done to me. I didn't need my family, didn't need my friends. And that is basically because other people probably knew what was happening. So he wanted me away from it. So I didn't have people in my ear saying, yeah, that's what he's like. So he got me away from all my friends, or from all their friends. So that's a bit of control. So he's saying, oh, I'm the only one that knows what's best for you, and they don't know what's best. They still want to keep you as a child, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a fairly common experience within the team, really, wasn't it? Yeah. It was that isolation from existing sources of support from friends and family. So it is a very, very common facet of it. Yeah. And I think it sort of plays into that thing about the grand, all-consuming love, doesn't it? You know, I think we all have this kind of romantic notion of love that, you know, you find the one.
Yeah.
And indeed, that's kind of almost what we're told to believe through the culture, which is that, and that person is the only person we will ever need.
Yeah.
And fighting against all those kinds of representations. Yep.
Jack has a temper, and he has started smashing things when we row. He tells me it's all my fault that I made him angry.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that one, Claire?
Yeah. When an abusive person wants to is angry, it's not his fault. It's your fault, and you made them angry, you know. Even if you haven't, it's your fault.
And we do sometimes struggle with this, I think, in the peer education sessions, don't we? Which is sort of trying to say to women that, you know, you are not responsible for somebody else's feelings.
No. You can only be responsible for your own feelings. Jack hasn't hurt me yet, but some of my friends are scared of him and they tell me I should get out. I think I might, but I don't know how, and I am frightened. What can you do to help?
Okay, so when we, sorry, Claire, I'm taking over. This is your slide, isn't it? Beg your pardon, mine's the next one. Sorry.
Women at Workshop said, listen to me, believe me, take it seriously, comfort me, explain my choices, help me do what I want.
Oh, beg your pardon. And then the next slide is, as we said before, that we use the same training exercise for both peers and professionals. So that this is what women with learning disabilities and autism said that they want from people as a basic response. And the next slide is the same question we asked professionals. And we were delighted to find that essentially they pretty much said exactly the same thing. So if this is on your list, great, because it's actually what women want. Maybe that last one is just kind of an additional, the last 2 bullet points are about the slightly more practical stuff about, knowing who to talk to and who you can refer on to and so on. We'll come back to some of those helplines and so on later. Right, I'm going to take you now to, this is a very, very whistle-stop tour of the Mental Capacity Act and its application in regard to abusive relationships, because obviously this is an important element of it. I think there remains that kind of difficult working area in the Mental Capacity Act where somebody who has capacity is still making very unwise decisions indeed. But yes, almost beyond the point of unwise, that where they actually appear to be willingly in a relationship which is both abusive and could lead to severe harm for that person. What can we do in those situations? And I'll say my experience is that the application of the Mental Capacity Act, even though it's now a fairly well embedded piece of legislation, it has after all been around for 15 years now, it's still actually been rather poorly rolled out. And I think an awful lot of the time that people still don't understand the subtleties of the Mental Capacity Act in terms of it being both decision and time specific. So we are talking about, there's no blanket application of capacity anymore at all. We are not in the realms of somebody either having capacity or lacking capacity, which unfortunately we all too often still find when we're working with the police. It's about specific decisions being made at specific times. So do remember that. And also, if the decision is not free from coercion, then again, it is not a lawful decision. It has to be free from coercion to count. And of course, what we've already said is that an awful lot of the domestic abuse experienced by women with learning disabilities and autism is of the coercive variety. So if we've gone through that and checked that both of those first 2 bullet points are true, and that this is about making that decision at that time and people being free to change their minds on that, and that they're not being coerced into that relationship, at that point, do we wash our hands of people? No, we don't. What we continue to say is, we don't abandon people, but we continue to work with people. Joint team approach towards risk assessment with the individual, make sure that they're aware of all the possible implications of what could happen in their relationship, short, medium, long term, the severity of that impact and what they can do to reduce that risk or to find a way out of it as and when they make that decision. And that in turn, obviously, to agreeing a plan with the person. And actually, it has just struck me, Ali, maybe this is something we should send you as well to pass on to people. We did come up with a kind of an easy read escape plan for women taking abusive relationships. So we can send that to you to post with this or just to distribute in any way you see fit.
Thank you.
Do have a look at that. And then obviously that plan needs to be reviewed, recorded in the normal way and reported up the line management structure within the service. And then alongside that, we are looking at, trying to repair the confidence and self-esteem of people, which, as we've seen before, is severely impacted even before they enter into abusive relationships. And so, yeah, need an awful lot of bolstering. So, be doing that alongside. Okay. So, what do people want you to say and do? So, the useful responses that the team have come up with, and indeed the social care staff and so on that we've worked with in social workers, etc., we've worked with in professional workshops. I've talked about these as well, but this is mostly from the team members' experience of abuse and recovering from abuse and what they have found useful. So they said about the opportunities talk, it's got to be the right person in the right place at the right time. And what's particularly important is actually having time for those one-to-one conversations. So obviously getting people away from the potentially abusive partner. Okay, now why has my my PowerPoint has just frozen? Ah, there we go. Excellent. Okay. Yeah, and then being available for people. When people need you is highly unlikely to be kind of during office hours. And I suspect this is where shared lives schemes and shared lives providers have a bit of a head start on here, because obviously you are pretty much 24/7 services. Just that really basic stuff about showing that you care. Believing the person. These things came up earlier on as well in what women said they wanted as the response. Creating trust with that individual. And again, I think that shared lives schemes and shared lives providers are in a very good position to be able to do this, again, because of the very particular nature of the services that you operate. Listening to people, and really crucially acting, because we very often say never underestimate the power of being there, never underestimate the power of just listening to people. People just want to be listened to, because that's all absolutely true, but they do also want you to do something, and to get them out of that situation. If they've told you, it's because they want you to do something as well. So listening and taking the action, and frequently that does break down, that link between listening and acting. And then people saying that they really wanted updates in the action. They kind of they give somebody a report, and then 3 weeks would go by and they hadn't heard anything. And I know that can be kind of part of the system, but again, particularly if you've got a learning disability, particularly if you've got autism, 3 weeks can be an awfully long time. To go on here, help to arrange counselling if that's what the woman wants. Allowing lots and lots of time for people, and we were saying on what we've learned so far from domestic abuse services, this is a time commitment that is at least double that you would expect for non-disabled people. People really wanted that continuity of individual contact. What people found difficult was they would they'd make a report to a police officer, and then say 3 weeks would go by, and then a different police officer would turn up and they'd have to tell the story all over again. And then they'd be referred to an IDVA and they'd have to tell the IDVA the story all over again. And then a housing officer might turn up and they'd have to tell the housing officer all over again. And honestly, that they were finding within a month or two, they'd spoken to 6 different individuals. They completely lost track of who was who. And of course, each time that they have to tell a story, they run the risk of being re-traumatized. So it's a dreadful situation. That continuity of individual contact, having one point of contact, is so important for women. Just being there, I've already mentioned, but yeah, doing stuff is good as well. Helping people, again, if that's what they want, a safe place to go. Explaining what people's choices are. They should probably come further up that list there, really, before the counselling and a safe place to go. And asking people what they would actually find helpful. Claire.
These are the numbers that we give out. So we go to the police 999, and we usually say that is only for emergencies, and if you're in danger right there and then, or 11101, which is non-emergency. We've got the domestic abuse helpline.
Let me just take you back one there, Claire, to the police one. And if you don't know whether it should be 999 or 101,
just dial 999.
Absolutely.
And we've got the domestic abuse helpline, which is 0808 224.
Your screen's covered, isn't it? Because of where the
something. Yeah.
200247.
Yeah. And safe is 0303 03 03 03 00112. Your local domestic abuse services and sexual violence service. Rape crisis is 0808 802 999.
Cool. Oh, again, this is, hang on. Oh, there we are. Yeah. Okay. Over to you again, Claire.
Make sure you are heard.
So to put this in context for people, again, the women in the team who had managed to find the necessary in order to make a report, as we said earlier on, very frequently, even when they made that report, weren't listened to. And so there's a real gap here as well, isn't there, Claire, between
Definitely.
wanting somebody to actually hear you and that happening. So it's something we started discussing in the workshops.
Yeah. Tell someone who will listen and act. Speak louder. Stand your ground. Take someone with you.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that one, Claire?
Tell someone who listens, and if they don't act, just repeat it again and keep speaking louder. And I know it may be hard, but just stand your ground. You are worthy of making sure you are heard. And for support, take someone with you, whether that's a parent, friend, support worker. Take someone with you for support.
Great. Okay. So, and then the stuff on prevention. So we started asking in the professionals workshops, we started asking people who attend those sessions, say whether they're social workers or social care enablers, members of community teams, managers and so on, what they can do to create a service team. Because everything we talked about so far is what you do if it's happened. But we're now a very brief section on how to make it less likely that it happens in the first place. So a few sort of early thoughts on that, and this list will continue to get bigger as hopefully we do get to finish these parts of the project. When the coronavirus stuff kicked in, we were a little bit over halfway on the peer education workshops and close to 3/4 of the way through our targets for professionals workshops. So hopefully we will get to continue to build on these bits of learning. So people attending those workshops, the professionals workshops, have so far said things like, just obviously getting yourself trained, attending the training that we're putting on for people, having an abuse champion. I've asterisked that one to remind me to say that this is a very good idea for Shared Lives as an organisation to have an abuse champion within the organisation, and to have an open service culture in which these things are actually talked about, to have clear and accessible reporting mechanisms for people. Looking at the possible housing solutions, so of course, absolutely what's happening in Shared Lives at the moment piqued our interest. We think that's exactly the way to be going, and we're really looking forward to seeing how the rest of that project rolls out. Don't ignore it, obviously, but so many people do. And be a resource, we've already covered that one. So knowing the kind of the helplines, how to get hold of local services and so on is really important. Have that stuff at your fingertips. Don't have that in your memory, but you have to know how to access that information when you need it. The escape plans we've already mentioned, I will send those up to Ali. So helping people with their escape plans, checking in regularly with people, recording everything, and then teaching people those very basic safety and relationship skills. Right. And then in terms of working with domestic abuse and sexual violence services, we suggest you get in touch with your local service and start building a relationship with them. Our experience so far, this is very early days, and again, we will know more about this, hopefully, towards the end of this year, early next, as long as we can proceed with the project as planned. But our discussion so far with those services has been, obviously, first, if you need to remind that they've got an equality duty, I think they pretty much know that, but it never does you any harm at all alluding to the equality duty. They have a responsibility to make their services accessible to women with learning disabilities and autism, which I think, as the 2015 Public Health England report points out, they are not at the moment. And they know that. I would say that every time we've never had a closed door, and whenever we phone people or email people or meet people, they say, they know that they're getting an increase in demand for their services from women with learning disabilities and autism, and they know they don't know how to meet that need. They know they're not doing enough, and they're quite keen to do so, just scared as we all are of the resource implications. So we think that they want to work with you. And the key messages to be pressing there are that they need to be offering their services more flexibly than they are doing at the moment. They need to be, and they need to be in a position where they can offer women the time that they need and the duration of contact that they need as well. But it's about communication, and that's the approach that we're going to be taking when we start training domestic abuse and sexual violence services in the autumn. It's all about communication. Then in terms of the staff development, so chucking a bit in terms of making sure that your staff are up to speed on domestic abuse. Talk to us. We're very happy to talk to you. We've got a number of resources that we've already worked up and that we're using, and they will continue to evolve. So please very much see us as a resource. Your local authority may well have something going on, as may your primary care trust as well. They're worth talking to. You never know, there might be some free training on domestic abuse available there. Worth asking them as well if they make that specific to people with learning disabilities. And working, as we've just been talking about, working with your local domestic abuse services, and of course Safe Lives. Talk to Ali, and as that project and work continues to unfold and is likely to develop in other ways. And Women's Aid as well, as a national organisation. Right, so just into the sort of help and resources section. So that's our contact details. And I'll flick through that quickly, and I think we bung them up again at the end of the presentation, which we're very close to now. And here's a few more bits and pieces just to touch on before we finish. So SARSAS, an excellent domestic abuse organisation in Bristol, but they developed a range of resources, easier read resources on things like consent that are of course available to you wherever you live. But if you're in Bristol, you're lucky because they've got a very, very good service within the city. There's this education pack here, which is the only one that we came across. It's designed by Bristol City Council for people with learning disabilities on domestic abuse. It's not absolutely fantastic, but it's a very good sort of starter for 10, I think you'll find. And there's certainly elements of it. We've ripped up a couple of exercises from this, haven't we, Claire? And from the video as well. There's a very good accompanying video. The video is harder to track down, but if people want to see that, I would suggest if you get in touch with me, then I can probably bung you a link for it. I can certainly dig something out. Tizard Centre, University of Kent, still at the forefront of all research around abuse and domestic abuse and learning disability. Always worth checking in with what they're up to, particularly the research of Michelle McCarthy I've referenced at this point. There's the link to the Public Health England report I've touched on a couple of times today. And also, if you happen to be in Cornwall, you're also very lucky because there's the Divas project, which operates out of the Women's Centre, which is in Bodmin. And that is another project that's run by women with learning disabilities who've experienced domestic abuse. For the last year or so, they've spent training police officers on domestic abuse, actually across Devon and Cornwall, I think now, Claire.
Yeah. And some are working with us, aren't they?
Absolutely, and there's quite a crossover between the two teams. Yeah, and we work very, very closely together. And again, I'm sure if you're in Cornwall, that they would be able to offer you training. Claire, closing stuff. So, a bit of context here, Claire. So go on.
So it's what us as a team say to help you.
Yeah. So we were saying when we had our prep for the project, we were saying, weren't we, that one of the things we discussed was if you kind of had like three, if you've boiled it down to three really key messages that you wanted everybody to hear.
Yeah.
Whether they were women with learning disabilities and autism or professionals or anybody, these are the key messages.
Yeah. So very importantly, know the warning signs, know where you can get help, make sure you are heard, and understand that people feel guilty, ashamed or dirty. So let them know it is not their fault and they are not alone. Yeah. We put that in purple and bold because that's what we wanted them to actually know, that we're here, they're not alone. People have been through it and have survived. And in no way is it their fault. You may think it's their fault for a long time, but in no way is it their fault.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Claire.
That's all right. And then we have the general thank you for joining in, us too. and a team picture, and then and then the contact, Rod's contact with us too, in Ali's with Shared Lives contact, so that if they want any resources or anything like that, then that's the links for them and telephone numbers.
And that's it, Claire. Anything you want to say before we wind this up then?
No, I think it's I know it's very strange in it this way, but I think it's going to be good, because it's like you say, it's something that can be kept and they can go back to. Like with the teaching that we do, yes, we can keep going back, but this will be on there forever and people can keep going back and reading it. So I think there is some benefits to actually doing it online, even though it's a bit different.
And do you mind if I say then this is the first time that you've ever done any online teaching?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. That's very impressive since your first time.
Thank you.
I'm going to take us back to a video view now. Hopefully you can all see us. We can see each other. Yeah, Claire and Rod, thank you so much. That's really informative, and I'm completely sure that it's going to be very helpful for professionals in the Shared Lives schemes. I just wanted to touch base on a few really important things that you said about this in relation to Shared Lives as well. Yes, I think we're really well placed as a sector to support people who've experienced abuse. You talked about making time for one-to-one time together and having that trust built and just being available. And I think that's a real advantage for Shared Lives. And so I would really kind of urge schemes to reassure Shared Lives carers and reassure people who are living in Shared Lives that they absolutely should contact them if they've got any concerns. And I think that your advice is spot on in terms of if schemes can identify a lead or a champion for domestic abuse, somebody in the team who's going to have that awareness. And I think, you know, we'd all like to feel like we know we've got somebody to go to, and you've made that really clear in the presentation.
Thank you.
So okay. I just wanted to wrap up by saying, really, it sounds like the work you're doing is going to be incredibly valuable to all of the services that you're working with and people that you're training. And just that we're very grateful to you for being able to share some of that with us and with the schemes and our carers. So thank you very much.
That's all right. You're welcome.
Okay. We'll leave it there, and we're going to have another webinar for Shared Lives carers, which is going to cover a lot of the similar themes that we talked about today, but will be a bit more targeted at how they can support people who are living with them. Thanks very much.
All right.